Hi there, welcome to the RevOps show. Doug stumbled upon a report by Go-to-Market Partners, the Go-to-Market Benchmark Report, Winter 2024 edition. While there isn't anything in there that Doug and Jess didn't know already, the outcomes made them a little sad. But the report gives us much to think about as we plan for the future. Download the report from Go-to-Market Partners in the show notes and follow along as Doug and Jess go over the items that stood out to them throughout the report and how we can take those learnings and apply them to what we're doing.
Jess, good morning.
You're lively this morning.
Sad.
Why are you sad?
Well, I don't know if you remember our last recording. It was New Year's.
Because you're sad because the Reds beat the Nats. Is that why you're sad?
Oh, don't put yourself in exclusive territory. The Pirates just crushed the Nats too. It's that in 1 week we go from what's possible to what is.
Well, my condolences. That's all I can tell you.
So you know what I've done to cheer myself up, Jess?
What,
I think it'll cheer you up too.
What have you done?
I've added another bit to my sound deck. Right. And so now I'll be able to use this. I'll be able to use this anytime someone draws a conclusion. It just makes absolutely no sense. You ready?
Sure. I think you gotta work on that. I know what that is because you've played it enough times, but you don't have. Oh, that was better. Okay. It sounded delayed the first time.
See, say something that makes no sense. Draw like a insane conclusion.
You can't put me on the spot like this.
See? So, who you got in the Final Four, Jess?
Who do I have, or who is in the Final Four?
Who are you picking?
So my dad and I do numerous brackets. The last bracket that I have open has
I'm not asking who you picked initially. I'm saying the Final Four now.
Purdue.
Purdue's not even in the Final Four.
Are they not?
No.
You got. I meant UConn. Not. Oh, hang on. Okay,
that makes me very unhappy.
No, Purdue is in. Don't do that to me.
It's South Carolina, NC State, Iowa, and Connecticut. And
you're looking at women's.
Oh, is there another one? Oh, that's
Jesus.
right. There's the men's Final Four this
I was
going
to say you just totally confused me. Okay, Purdue. Purdue, Doug.
Did you see the news?
What?
Average ticket price for the women's Final Four is higher than men's. And if you buy it on the secondary market, women's Final Four tickets are running as high as $2,000. Men's are $1,000. Isn't it?
It's wild.
But here's the real question I have for you, Jess.
Yes, Doug.
See, this is just our random set of topics to get started. Are you ready for the path of totality?
What?
The path of totality.
What the hell are you talking about?
Monday. The eclipse.
Oh.
For those of you that don't know this, Jess is basically the second city in the United States to get the eclipse.
Jess doesn't care about the eclipse. That's the reality of it.
We need to have a we need to find a reason to have a team meeting on Monday.
In San Antonio?
No, just on Zoom.
Okay, sure.
Because that way I can start off the meeting with Pink Floyd's Eclipse.
Oh my God, Jesus! I don't think our team would pick that up. I just want you to know.
Oh, I bet you our team is far more
Pink
aware
Floyd
and interested in it than you.
So I'm familiar with it because my dad's a huge Pink Floyd fan. So.
Oh no, I'm just talking about the eclipse.
Oh, the eclipse, I'm sure they're aware of. I'm talking about the fact they're not going to pick up the reference because of the song.
Well, the song finishes, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon.
Yeah, sure.
So what time is the eclipse supposed to?
I have no idea, Doug. Like I like when I say that I have no interest in the eclipse, I mean I have no information.
So I think it's like about 1:40 p.m. Central Time when it's supposed to be in the
I think
total.
it's in the middle of the day because they're inviting us to go to the school. So let's see. What time is the eclipse in San Antonio?
See, what you need to do is, so you need to queue up eclipse.
It starts at 12:14. The peak time is 1:27 to 1:49, and it ends at
1:27.
3 p.m.
So go 1:28, and I think the song's like 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So at 1:25, you should start the song Eclipse, and then at the total eclipse, the line "But the sun is eclipsed by the moon"
Jesus.
will play.
Okay, well, great.
And it'll be a convergence.
So let's call a meeting at 2:30 Eastern time.
It's time to get things started on the most sensational inspiration.
What are we talking about today, Jess?
We are going to review the go-to-market benchmark report.
Oh, we should warn everybody what day and what time we're recording this at.
Okay, it is April 5th.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the date.
Oh, what
It's
day?
Friday at 9:30 a.m.
Friday at 8:30 a.m.
This is a Friday morning recording. I think these are where some of our most interesting episodes come out of.
They are.
Artie, I forgot. What did you say we're talking about today?
We're going to review the go-to-market benchmark report.
The winter 2024. Does that mean there's going to be a summer 2024 report? The winter 2024 go-to-market benchmark report from Go-to-Market Partners.
Yep.
Yeah. So here's the key question. Have you looked at it?
I have looked at it.
Okay, good.
So much faith.
What?
So much faith in me.
I have written many book report in my school career on books that I've never read.
Yeah, that's not my MO. I was the one makes fun of me because I was the one that showed up with the books the first day of class at college because I read the syllabus ahead of class starting. My husband was very perplexed by this when we were in college.
It is. Yeah, I don't really understand that.
Yeah,
because there's a distinct chance they might not even use the book.
We always use the book, but that's fine.
Yeah, so I thought it was a really interesting report. Just for some context for whenever you might be listening to this, report was released in April, the first week in April. We're recording this on the 5th, so as far as I know, this came out on Monday. That's when I first saw it, at least. And so what I want to do is talk about what some of their findings are. I don't know what you thought, Jess, but the news wasn't so good.
I'm a little bit upset that you had me reading this. It made me sad.
Did it tell you anything you didn't know, though?
So no, it didn't tell me anything I didn't know. It confirmed a lot of assumptions and things I had been seeing in the news. So I wasn't shocked by it. Yeah, exactly. I wasn't shocked by it. That doesn't mean it made me happy.
Yeah, and by the way, just so everyone who's listening, that statement, did you learn anything you didn't know? That wasn't a statement on the value of the report. I think the report's well worth it. It's like I read it, I'm like, oh wow, this makes me sad. Wow, this really hurts. But then I was like, wait, I actually kind of already knew that. I think there's a really interesting takeaway that we're going to get to, but we're going to get to that towards the end. Otherwise, you might not listen to the rest of the episode. So we're going to review the findings. This is kind of how I'm thinking about it. We'll review the findings. We'll kind of go in a couple key areas of findings. We'll have some commentary on it. We'll finish by giving some key takeaways, what we think the takeaways are, and most importantly, what do you need to do about it?
Yep.
And then the one thing I want to do in the report, it's kind of an interesting report, how it was structured. I'm saying this from a marketing perspective, because they kind of intermixed a lot of their point of view and elements. We are not going to be talking about their predictions, et cetera. I think, maybe Well, their predictions are very, very focused towards SaaS. That's the industry that they focus on. And I want to broaden this conversation, but also that's kind of a story for another day. As a matter of fact, the one fault that I would have on the report, and again, I want to emphasize, I thought it was a really well done. I think there's lots of insights here. The nature of some of it, and I can't say it's wrong at all, but there was a little bit of a point of view seeking confirmation. So there's a little bit with some of, I can give you a factual, accurate report. The data that you're getting, what you're looking at, is far broader than what you're seeing. So, actually, I was on an analyst call yesterday, and they asked me, I think they asked me like, what's the typical gross margin for, or what's our gross margin? And I'm like, oh, well, that's where I get to play accountant. My answer is, what would you like it to be? How do you want me to frame or carve out our definition of gross margin? So that's just the one place where, and I would say this about any report. There aren't many people that release, especially free reports. Mm-hmm. There aren't many people who release free reports that doesn't align with something that they're doing or offering. So just be careful that you understand where the data is coming from. So with that said, I thought I'd go through real quick and share kind of the overview findings, the key things I thought were interesting from the executive summary.
Yep.
56% of companies missed their 2023 revenue plan.
Yeah.
57% failed to build adequate pipeline. See, that upset Dakota.
Yeah, I was going to say Dakota didn't like that one.
Dakota is very focused on pipeline velocity. She cares about that a lot. 72% are still seeing, I should say, increasing sales cycle times.
Wow.
And I actually talked about this in a webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago. I think was it last week or I can't remember.
It was last week, Doug. That was last week.
I think the length of sales cycle is a much overused metric. I actually think for most companies, their sales cycle times aren't long enough. The reason for that is they're not entering early enough. But this increasing sales cycle time is not because you're entering earlier. It's actually what you're going to see is entering even later. So even with all the elements that are designed to make sales cycle times extraordinarily efficient, you're continuing to see less and less efficiency.
Well, I feel like from you, that one piece specifically, that was a theme I was hearing from you all year last year. We talked about it. You brought it up. You were seeing it in a myriad of places for both us and customers.
Yeah. And so what I talk about actually is the consideration cycle or the decision cycle. And so the way I kind of refer to that is the paper's on the table. All the information has been exchanged, right? Like that's the point where you enter a new phase of, and I think I'll share, from my experience, what I'm seeing is in Q1, it did not continue to increase. It's not getting better. It's still really, really, really ornery. The next one I think is going to surprise some people. SMBs actually performed better relative, and especially SMBs that brought significant focus. The thing that is not surprising at all, but I think will surprise some people, at the enterprise level, they're seeing they saw significant challenges in two places. The first one is new logo acquisition. That's actually not, that's the least bit surprising because, and all you have to do is go back and listen to, I'm sure we'll refer to this a little bit later, go back and listen to our dangerous metrics and my rant on net revenue retention. The thing that's interesting there is that they had, I don't think that's new in 2023. I think that enterprise has been struggling at new logo acquisition for a couple, 3 years. I think you've seen a ongoing trend, hence the rise of net revenue retention as the metric.
Right.
And then they also saw, and this is the fascinating part, saw decreasing performance in the second half. My words, not theirs, as it appears that they exhausted in the continuation of increasing revenues from existing customers. Right. And all you have to do is take a look at recurring or reoccurring revenue businesses, and you're going to see this net revenue retention number is just continuing to decrease. And I think it really got to an acute level. Like, that's my takeaway from the report, got to an acute level in the second half of the year, which kind of explains to me, and I'm seeing this from an observation standpoint, but especially feeling it from a customer, when I have my customer hat on, just how obsessed companies are right now with selling you the next thing, monetizing.
Yep.
I think, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, I think that is addressing a symptom of a problem with something that probably provides a little bit of a short-term appeasement, but I'm seeing a lot of negative equity being built up in existing customer relationships. And I think this, I think boardrooms and executives are spending more time talking about monetizing relationships than they are talking about solving for relationships.
Yep.
And then going forward, Q1 seemed to stop the deterioration, which aligned to what I said earlier, what I saw, but it's not showing improvement, and a lot of cautiousness going into Q2. So when you looked at the executive summary, when you looked at the overall picture, what other thoughts did you have?
I mean, so I don't know that I had any other thoughts. I think you covered it pretty well. I was surprised about the SMBs outperforming. That was probably, you asked if I had any surprises. That's probably the one thing that I was surprised by. I saw your notes ahead of looking at the report, so I had that little spoiler. I think the comment about what they had in there on the search of healthy growth and in data we trust, where they talked about the running overbuilt, inefficient growth engine. So revenue operations grew quite a bit. I was actually surprised by how much. So I knew there was a big push for revenue operations. I was surprised to see how high that number was, but then pipeline velocity went down. So like, they built, like, a lot of companies focused on trying to grow that revenue operations function, didn't really improve that pipeline. I'm not surprised by that, because you're not going to see the improvement of that, especially because I think part of that growth is going to be that function is going to be new for companies, so they don't really know how to best leverage that revenue operations function because it's new to their organization.
You're giving away our later stuff, Jess.
I know. Well, you asked me my thought.
All right, so let's go to the first subset of findings, where we get into a little bit deeper, kind of looking at how companies dealt with the macroeconomic factors of 2023. My favorite new word. By the way, it's not my favorite new word. 57% pipeline worse than expected last year. 72% sales velocity below expectations. 56% failed to attain revenue, with a degradation of that from the first half of 23 to the second half of 23. So from an operating perspective, second half of 2023 appears to have been worse than the first half of 2023.
Yep.
So for me, I've got two observations on this, and then something I want to talk about. The first thing that actually surprised me, I was somewhat, as close to blown away as I could have been, which is across these metrics, the consistency from across all segments. So they broke up the segments as small business 0 to 250 employees, mid market 251 to 1,000, enterprise 1,001 or more employees. And if you look at all of these metrics, just remarkably consistent. So again, SMBs fared a little bit better. That actually doesn't surprise me because that's where I've seen more of the recovery in the market is on the smaller side. I think, one of the things that's happening on the customer side, so on the sell to side, as you're dealing with larger organizations, they have to make sense of what's going on to operationalize that. And I'm still seeing them very much just kind of in a freeze place.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought was just really interesting is when you broke it down, when they broke down at July 23, has your sales velocity been impacted by economic conditions? The worse than expected was 81%. Are you on track for revenue attainment goals in 2023? It was 37%.
Yeah.
But it finished at 56%. So what you're seeing is that sales velocity and pipeline creation degradation has a lagging impact, right?
Yep.
And that's something, and we'll get into this when we talk about takeaways, that's something that I think people are not accounting for.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. Well, you know what? I don't want to get into it right now because we'll end up giving it all away. There was an observation in here around pipeline. So it seems to be like what I inferred from this is, this metric called pipeline coverage. That there's a lot of there's a move towards 5x coverage. So that means if you've got a $10 million number, you need to have $50 million in pipeline. I think I think pipeline coverage is a metric that's leading to part of this problem.
How so?
Because if I go in and I'm thinking I need 5x coverage, coverage, then what I'm basically treating every deal the same. Yeah. Right. Okay. You're playing this game of averages, and I think it's leading into. I think sales organizations spend too much time on low quality opportunities.
Yep.
And the thing that's interesting is a lot of high quality opportunities, they're not easy opportunities. Right. It's like one of my first lessons in business. Someone comes in super pumped, super excited, the flame's burning hot. Like, oh my God, wow, this is awesome. This is great. In this pursuit of efficiency, we're getting really inefficient because we're managing pipelines. We're not managing opportunities.
Yeah, that, and I see that a lot. So the other thing that's interesting about that metric that they reference is, if you have that build of pipeline, they're saying, you get efficient growth and it requires less marketing. But one thing throughout the report that they talk about is there's been a cut on marketing spend. And I know we don't want to hone in on that specifically. That said, that does seem to be impacting a lot of what is happening, that cut on marketing spend. To your point, things getting in the pipeline sooner, driving those early stages. So I'm wondering if that focus on that metric and thinking, okay, well, if I have that, I can cut that marketing spend, is having an impact that you don't see until later.
Yeah, and if you look at it, I mean, this is something that I'm working on. I don't have it right now, but it's something that I'm working on. We look at our historical pipeline. We look at our historical pipeline coverage. But what we need to do is we need to apply a quality index. So I'm working on an approach to bring in a quality metric, so that when I'm looking at a historical pipeline, the total value of the pipeline's a number, but also like is a $2 million pipeline better than a $1 million pipeline? I don't know.
Depends on your opportunities.
Right. And the mistake that I see happening is I think too much of quality is being based on proximity. And what I mean by proximity to the buy. So,
Yeah.
we've talked about previously, and when we talk about forecasting, that this whole idea of weighting probability of a deal to what stage they're in is a bad myth. High intent as being higher quality, another myth.
Yep.
So like, kind of figuring that out. Like the thing that bothers me about all this investment in tech and metrics and data is we're not getting smarter with the use of our numbers. Again, it's I think there's too much of people trying to manage their numbers rather than manage the business.
Yep.
Which takes us into the efficient growth findings. And I think this tells the story.
Okay.
Going into 23, companies were concerned. So by the way, all these metrics, all the difficult operating environment stuff, I don't think no one was radically surprised by it. I actually think coming into 23, the expectation was the economy was going to be worse than it was.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about recession.
Right.
But they were confident they would be able to grow through it. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
They did not.
Yeah.
And because of it, they had to react to that. And that led to increased cost cutting and increased layoffs through the year.
Yep.
Now, as growth efforts weren't being met, the response was cutting allocation to growth efforts. So marketing spends going down.
Yep.
Sales team expenses costs going down. Right. Well, so here's the first question. How does it make any sense that if we're not getting the growth that we need, that the answer is to just cut the allocation? Now, I'm not saying don't cut the budget. Don't reduce the budget. Right. But what we're seeing, I call them peanut butter cut. They're peanut butter cuts. Right. They're just spread evenly across the bread.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're cutting, especially in a performance type market, like when performance is challenging, don't be smooth butter, peanut butter, be chunky. Your cut should be really chunky.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Where is your focus going to be? Right. And that gets back to this aspect of the way companies are thinking about looking at and planning for growth. I think is heavily flawed because they're missing the lag. The last piece, enterprise was more stable. SMB was more volatile. Mm-hmm. But SMB seemed to be ahead in the recovery right now, though it's still early. We kind of talked about that a little bit before.
Yep.
Then the finding that you had, a lot of money seems to be pouring into RevOps.
Yep.
Which is defined as the analytical information needed to power and hold your teams accountable. So in the under 200 employee segment in 21-22, investments in this function were down about 2%. In the first half of 23, down about 19%.
Right.
In the second half of 23, up 64%. In the mid-market segment, up 3% in 21-22, down 13% in the first half of 23, up 42%.
Yep.
In the mid-market, in the enterprise segment, up 13% in 21-22, down 4% in 23, up 22%. In the first half of 23, up 22% in the second half of 23. In the Fortune 500 space, up 32% in 21-22. So that mid-market and above was investing, but all Fortune 500 down 6% in first half 23, up 8% in second half 23.
Right.
So here's the thing that's interesting to me. We're companies coming into 23, they're concerned about growth, and so they cut revenue operations.
Yep.
And now interest and investments in those are all up significantly. And pipeline velocity is down. Like so here again, here's my question. I like the definition: the analytical information needed to power and hold your teams accountable. Are we getting that? Are we performing that? Are we taking that into account? Are we taking the issues that are actually happening into account?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we are. I think all the things that we've talked about recently about the RevOps function, this is the place for RevOps to prove itself. Now the thing that scares me is I don't think I don't think adding to revenue operations directly increases opportunity. I mean, I think revenue operations is an investment in the structure and system of your organization, but those things, like there's a J curve to that. Those things take 9 to 15 months to really begin to show themselves.
Right. That's what I was saying. Like you're not going to see the benefit of that for some time. The other thing that I found interesting about this is if we go back to like the cuts on marketing and you want to talk about like what directly impacts your pipeline, cuts were made in marketing, cuts were also made in sales. And so they cut in those places, but they increased in revenue operations. So there is this drive for efficiency. The thing that is going to be interesting is to see does that actually play out and have an impact. I don't know if you can with revenue operations if you're cutting in other places.
The last thing, and this actually didn't get into my notes for you, so this will surprise you, but you read the report, so I'm sure you're on top of it. Leadership and management defined as the care and coaching required to motivate, educate, and enable your people. Up in interest and attention to that, up 48% in small, 30% in mid, 15% in enterprise. That's second half of the year. I think that, what's fascinating about this is if you take a look at what our 4 cornerstones were in the webinar, mm-hmm. we basically hit all of these points when we talked about the crucial importance of learning and development. Actually, if you listen to last week's episode or whatever the last episode was of RevOps show where we talked about the role, the sales manager role, I think that is, I think that is a majorly overlooked area, a major leverage point. But I think what this is saying, like here's what I'm seeing from this report, combined with some other reports and our firsthand experience. We're in the end stage of the shift. One of my favorite business quotes is Clayton Christensen in Business: "The new game begins before the old game ends." Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about the new buyer for 20 years.
Yep.
Right. The dynamics and the structure between buyer and seller has been changing for 20 years. What's masked that change and has propped up the old game mm-hmm. is money was basically free.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you look at this, what's happening is, this is a statement to me that says we are in a different environment than where we were 18 months ago, Lord knows 3 years ago. And I think one of the things that's happening that, like, I don't think I'm particularly insightful in saying this, is the pandemic led to a burst in areas that was very artificial. And as it's come back down, what we're finding is it's not just a correction to the norm. It's not just a reversion to the mean. Mm-hmm. There is something more structural. And again, if you go back to the issues that we were dealing with as we were ending 2019, what happened was we had basically 3 years of artificial constraints and changes to how we live, right? The remote revolution that was going to be permanent and is now not so. That's not a judgment on right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just clearly not what everyone thought was going to be the case.
Yep.
Though it's different and it will never be like it was before 2020. But the world was flooded with just so much money.
Yep.
Bring back PPP. That's my mantra. So, like the key takeaways to me, don't underestimate the lag.
Yeah.
And I don't think people take that into account.
Yeah.
I don't think they took it into account in going into 2023. Everyone's looking at their lagging indicators, and that's why everyone was confident finishing 2022. I mean, in the world of SaaS, the SaaS world changed going, Q3 2022 is when that changed. But your 2022s still were pretty strong because your first half was strong and we were, they were jumping on net revenue retentions, which again are a look back at the past. I would say, new customer acquisition, especially in a recurring or reoccurring business, is more of a forward-looking indicator. So we were, companies were banking on the fact that their revenues and profitability were going to continue to increase because their net revenue retention numbers were so strong, despite the fact that their new customer acquisition was down.
Right.
Right. Which, by the way, remember when I'm looking at net revenue retention, if I'm looking at, 23 versus 22, it takes out all of new customers in 23. So it underreports that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep. And so, going into 23, they had confidence that they were going to grow through it, weakening metrics, right? All those things I talked about. Well, I covered my notes without even, I covered that point without even realizing. And so, like, how are most companies still thinking about growth? Well, they're looking at, okay, where do we want to be?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what they did going into 23. Where do we want to be? Or where do we need to be to report to the board or whomever? Where are we now? Okay, here's our growth. But then they didn't look at, okay, what's the underlying condition? Where are the trends? Where do we need to make investments?
Right.
And so the other thing that I think I think a lot of companies are counting on the fact that the macroeconomic environment is going to improve as the means for, I don't even know why that thumbs up just came. I don't even know what I did. I rubbed my nose. Sorry. Won't. I think that, like, even as the economy improves, even if we see more momentum in markets, if you're not accounting for that lag, it's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. And I think that you'll weaken into the environment.
Yep.
So like, what can RevOps do? Really get into what is your growth model. Really get into what are the key drivers. Really look at what are your key indicators. What are your key metrics?
Yep.
I mean, now is the time to stress test.
So what's the central problem that you see coming out of having reviewed the report?
So I think that the report, I think what I saw in the report supports what I think the central problem is.
Okay.
So it's not what is the central problem coming out of reading the report.
Yep.
I've been talking about this internally, as you know, for a little while. So what is the central problem in its most basic explanation?
Sure.
Buyers and sellers don't know what the hell they're doing. Buyers don't know how to buy and sellers don't know how to sell.
Wow.
And here's the thing, it's neither of their faults. It's a structural problem.
Okay.
Right? As I mentioned earlier, the buying environment isn't changing, it has changed.
Right.
Right. And, in addition to the structural items we talked about before, flow of information, power dynamics of the last 2 decades, we're not in a bad economy, so much. I mean, and that's something to remember. We're not in a bad economy. I mean, we're at 3.8 or 3 point something percent unemployment.
Yeah.
By the way, when I went to college, which I realized, someone asked me, we were talking about AI. They said, "Are you familiar with Einstein? Salesforce is AI." And I said, "Am I familiar with Einstein? I grew up with Einstein." Albert Einstein was a dear friend of mine.
Oh my God.
See, that was my way of saying I'm old.
Yep.
5% unemployment was considered full employment. There were even people who like literally said like, it's impossible to get under 5% unemployment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not in a bad economy so much as we're in what used to be called the normal economy in the latter half of the 20th century. Right. And what's a normal economy? A normal economy is one where money costs something. It costs you something to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, remember, we were literally in a zero interest rate environment.
I remember.
Banks were borrowing money at zero.
Yeah.
Right. Money literally didn't cost anything. Actually, money had a negative cost because even at a 1.5 to 2% inflation,
yep.
If I'm at zero, if I'm paying 0% for it, then inflation is like I'm incentivized to spend money.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And then the other thing is risks matter. And so why are decision cycles so much harder? Why are they so much longer? Because we're back, like the risk side of the business is back to having, they're no longer the naysayers who are the growth, like your chief financial officer is no longer the chief growth prevention officer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
If we listened to the CFO, we would never have. Right.
Right.
And so again, like this is, the biggest complainers about this, of course, are on the SaaS side. And I just want to say, like, go visit another industry, go sell in another industry for 6 months, and you'll understand what a difficult environment can be. So the buying environment has changed. And then what I mean by buyers and sellers, neither of them know what they're doing. Buyers today are overwhelmed. Purchases that are simple, they're not what we're talking about here. Actually, Dharmesh Shah had a nice LinkedIn post where he talked about tools are bought, transformations are sold.
Yep.
Buyers are overwhelmed and confused today. They don't know how to buy. And you know what? They shouldn't know how to buy on those big things because they don't deal with them on an ongoing, like the purchase of something important doesn't happen every day, every month, every year. Right. Mm-hmm. The ongoing management of it might be an everyday thing. So like they may have all the expertise in the world for managing the issue, but the purchase of it, the change element of it, that is unique. And so they're overwhelmed, they're confused. They don't know how to buy your products today. And by the way, most of the people in their businesses, most of the people on the buy side, just like most of the people on the sell side, I mean, we're basically 25 to 30 years from the last time we were in a condition like we're in right now. Money costs, risk matters.
Yep.
Right. So on the buy side, like most CFOs have never been in a role where these were the drivers.
Yeah.
So they're still figuring that out. They're overwhelmed. They're confused. They lack the data or signal to know where or how to spend their time on this process.
Yep.
Right. So sellers need to get back. I mean, selling used to be considered leading the process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Sellers need to get back into that position to lead the process.
Yep.
The problem is that sellers are also overwhelmed and confused, and they have no signal on where or how to spend their time. That's that pipeline coverage that we talked about.
Right.
They are spending too much time on low value, high fragile opportunities. They don't have enough time to spend on higher quality opportunities. And the problem here is all the old solutions and the go-to playbook to address those issues are highly, 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 highly flawed.
Yeah.
And their use has led to part of the structural problem that we're in today, lead scoring. There are, about 2 to 5% of the time when lead scoring is used, is it being used in the appropriate situation?
Mm-hmm.
And probably only about a third to 20% of the time when it's used in the appropriate situation is the right approach being used. So most people who are doing lead scoring, and remember, lead scoring is an elimination factor. Lead scoring is a tactic to tell you when you have too many, when you're overwhelmed by people, quote unquote, expressing interest, who am I not going to deal with? How many times has someone talked to us about lead scoring because they want to know what the high quality opportunities are? Lead scoring is not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
That's not what it's designed for. Deal scoring is just a subset of that.
Yep.
And intent-based, look, intent-based has everything to do with timing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying ignore intent, but I am saying high intent doesn't equal high quality.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And then the other thing is high intent, you have very, very little control over intent. It's certainly in the short term.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Even the greatest demand creator of all time has proven that they have very little impact on intent. Apple.
Okay.
Vision Pro. But I used to talk about how Apple had a demand creation monopoly, right? Because if they came out with a new product, by definition, it meant I wanted it.
Yeah.
Like it was really great. I didn't have to think about it.
Yep.
Right. Well, all you have to do, iPhone sales decreasing. I used to there was a period probably up to about the iPhone 10, iPhone X. I think I had every version of iPhone.
Yeah.
I basically get the new phone every 2 years now. And sometimes I wonder, did I really need to do that?
Yeah.
I've not even been tempted to get the Vision Pro.
No.
Not even tempted. And that's not a bust on Apple. It's just, Now over time, do I believe at some point Apple will convince me that I need the Vision Pro? I do think that's going to, I think there's a good chance of that. But it's going to take some time, right?
Yep.
So the difficulty as you become more and more and more intent-based is that's all about confirmation. That's not about creation. That's not about development.
Right.
I really want to ask the question to all the people that are running sales development programs, business development programs, market development programs. Where's the development? If all you're doing is finding high intent leads, if all you're trying to do is match the high intent, you're not developing anything.
Right.
It's like I'm gonna develop trees. I'm only gonna deal with 100 feet and above sequoia trees. I'm sorry, you're not developing anything there.
Right. Yep.
So I think so what needs to happen? What's the single best thing?
Yeah.
That an organization, and I think this plays right into the role of RevOps, what they can do is build the system and build the structure that provides the signal and the prompt to guide actions and activity. Mm-hmm. Focus on the core. What is your core business? How much does Vern Harnish from Gazelles had a nice post the other day. He said, from a CEO standpoint, does your number one strength, does the strength of the CEO align with the number one point of your brand promise? Right. And he brought up, Steve Jobs obsessed about design.
Right. Yeah.
And then he brought up, and Boeing hires accountants to be their CEO. And then we wonder why they're having all the problems that they're having. Right. Right. And by the way, when they hired engineers, when engineers were their CEO, Boeing was the plum of all, right? So Boeing lost its core.
Yeah.
If you take a look at, and when we get into these high foam markets, it's very easy to lose your core.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it for the last 3 years as everyone's trying to sell everything and we're talking about wallet share and all that. What is your core?
Yep.
What defines quality? Too many pipelines are really fragile. Too many growth functions are really fragile. This all works so long as everything stays in alignment, which, by the way, is easy to do when we've got 10 years of zero interest rates, basically.
Right.
Right. When you have that clarity, you can invest in engagement. That's where demand forms. Demand forms in the ideation, identification, and definition of the problem. So, our philosophy from the time that you met me is we have a segment of the market that we sell to.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a much broader segment that we're more than happy to help buy.
Right.
But we don't confuse those two.
Mm-mm.
Right. And make no mistake, if you're someone that's in the buy category, some of your revenue is being invested on our part into becoming even more compelling for the segment that we want to sell to. So we take the non-core and invest it in the core.
Yep.
Now, does that maximize our revenue on a year-to-year basis? It probably doesn't. Right? In 2021, 2022, we probably could have grown more revenue, but we would have been weaker in the process. And right.
Yeah.
And then build that into your systems so that the system, and this is what Peter Drucker meant when he said, build the genius into the system.
Yep.
The system should be guiding and prompting the behavior, not just cataloging it.
Yep.
And by the way, that means you got to change your metrics too. So build your structure, build your system to generate the signal that guides behavior for how you're doing things moving forward. I think that's what this report says. You've got to get ahead of this. You've got to have a solid model. You got to keep that model up to date and always be reinforcing your core.
Yep. I think you tied that in a nice little lovely bow. The only thing I wanna kind of highlight is, so I don't know that I've ever heard you say that Clayton Christensen quote before, that in business the new game begins before the old game ends, but I love that.
You stopped listening to me about 3 years ago.
Obviously. And then the part that resonated most with me with the report was don't estimate the lag. Like, don't underestimate the lag. I think all of those things that you said about what you need to do, absolutely. But those were kind of my takeaways.
And I actually think that it's worse than underestimating the lag. I think what's happened is most people just ignore it. They don't even.
I was going to say, I don't think they don't account for it. Like,
all you have to do is look at the vast majority of any type of waterfall analysis. I mean, heck, look at how any reporting metric says leads, contacts, customers. There's.
Yep.
I remember, like, so we have a waterfall model that takes in that fully takes sales cycle into account.
Yep.
We spend more time explaining why the sales qualified lead doesn't show up for 9 months in the model, in one case, or 3 months, than we do explaining anything else.
Right. Exactly.
With that in mind, Jess, just remember, go Nats, and say no to shitty RevOps.
Till next time.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. That report shined a light on the not-so-fun side of what's been happening in the market. Even if the report made you sad like it did to Jess, know that you can do something to turn around those downward trends. The biggest piece here is knowing who your core is and playing to that core. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to go subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating and share the episode. We would really appreciate it. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug and Jess about your go-to-market strategy or anything in the report at all, email me at hannah@liftenablement.com or hit us up on LinkedIn @liftenablement. And until next time, just say no to shitty RevOps.